Now we're going to build the perfect edge rusher, excuse me, not edge rusher, defensive lineman in this upcoming draft class, blending all the traits we just talked about from last segment and more. Toughness, hands, athleticism, get off, power, and bend. Before we get to the draft class, though, I wanted to give you guys who I would do for the NFL, just so you kind of have a feel for what we're talking about with all of these. So for toughness, I went Max Crosby as the pinnacle of that at the NFL level, the superlative, if you will. Guy doesn't come off the football field. Guy plays his butt off every single snap. That's toughness. Hands, I went with Aiden Hutchinson. His bag this past year was as good as I've seen in my time covering the NFL before he got hurt. He was lights out in terms of hand placement, in terms of consistency, in terms of number of moves at his disposal. Went with him. Athleticism, Myles Garrett. No real explanation necessary. Get off, Micah Parsons, yet again. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Power. I went on the interior for one of these. Dexter Lawrence, the strongest defensive lineman in the NFL, overpowers pretty much every single guard and center he faces. And then bend, that's a TJ Watt trait. The guys that can really, that's how he wins, is just getting to the edge, getting back to the quarterbacks, surprising them, surprising offensive tackles. That's how he wins. For the draft, though, I went toughness, Josiah Stewart. We discussed him. We both agree on this one. The guy plays ball. Snap in and snap out. He will stick his helmet in a guy who he is giving up 100 pounds to and play with no fear whatsoever. Hands, this one's a little bit of a call, Pete, but I'm going with Ole Miss's Jared Ivey. When I watch him play, I just see hand placement and consistency with his usage that looks like an NFL vet. That's the kind of guys I want to draft when projecting the NFL. Athleticism, get off, Abdul Carter, breaking no ground there. Power, this one's a little bit under the radar. David Walker, the Central Arkansas defensive end. The guy is built like a jumbo running back. He's 6 foot, 263, and overpowers pretty much everyone you see him face off against on his tape. And last but not least, bend, Mike Green, the Marshall defensive end. That's why he led the FBS in sacks last year. He can really get to the edge and get back to the quarterback. Hi, Pete. That was my list. Who do you got for your list at the collegiate level here?
By the way, you could have went Abdul Carter Ben too if you wanted to. You could have put
Oh,
him
I
in all
know.
those guys.
That's why he's just as an athlete, it's all there. Like every single trait he has.
Yeah, like I didn't want to use. I didn't know we could use guys twice. Otherwise, I would have done the same thing.
Choose, yeah.
For toughness, I went with Josiah Stewart. And by the way, for those watching this, we had no idea who each other picked. I had no idea you picked Josiah Stewart. I went with him as well. Again, love watching his physical play, not afraid to stick his head in there. Can rush the passer, too. I think he's going to be a steal for whoever gets him. Mason Graham, hands. I think he uses his hands like a veteran. And I think that helps him compensate for having the short arms. He's really good with it. He looks like a pro who's been doing it for a long time. So I would have put athleticism. I would have put Abdul Carter again, but I didn't know we could go 2 for 2. So I went with Stewart. Stewart does have unreal athleticism for a guy that big. So I put him at number in the athleticism. I put get off for Abdul Carter. And then power, I went with Kenneth Grant. I think inside he's a strong power player in the middle of that defense. And there were other guys I considered, but I think Grant held up when he was doubled a bunch. He's one of those guys that holds up against the double team.
First off, way too many Michigan guys there. As a Notre Dame alum, I'm cringing here thinking about 3 Michigan guys being superlative in this draft class. Hard to disagree with any of them, though. Mason Graham one. I want to hear what you think of this, my comp for him. It is the defensive tackle version of Aiden Hutchinson. They're so similar in terms of like pros, cons, and how they get talked about coming out, where it's like they played insanely good ball. Now, obviously, Aiden Hutchinson was 1 year older coming out, but just like insanely developed already hitting the NFL, but tiny arms for their respective position. I think Aiden Hutchinson actually even has shorter arms than Mason Graham does. Not explosive, not big, not like strong, but somehow they continually win. Am I barking up the wrong tree here? Am I close?
No, you're right. And here's the one concern I have with Mason Graham. He's on the ground a lot. And is he a great pass rusher? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You if you're going to draft that guy that high, you want him being Aaron Donald rushing the passer. You want him being able to, and I don't know if he is. Don't get me wrong. In this draft, I like him a lot. but I think there might be a real ceiling there for him. And I don't know if he's going to go crashing through it.
I do think this draft class compared to last year's draft class. So I would have Mason Graham as the third best position player. So it's Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, then Mason Graham. But if we just transpose this year's class on the last year's class, I'm not drafting Mason Graham in last year's class until probably pick 14. Brock Bowers went 13. I would have had Mason Graham behind him. And now he's not going to fall to pick 14 in this year's draft, but like that just kind of shows you, one, how I feel about this year's class, but two, just like how year on year there can be big fluctuations in sort of the top end talent in each class.
By the way, he might be fourth if you count it. Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, wide receiver, Travis Hunter, corner. Right.
That's a good point.
I mean, because
on different draft boards, I mean,
I've heard from a bunch of people that say he's a better wide receiver than he is corner. I've heard a bunch of people that think he's a better corner than he is wide receiver, and so he could be he's the best at both those spots. Think about that. That's what he is. He's the best at both spots. What is he better at? That's the question.
What do you think? What would you say?
Okay, initially I thought corner because I think it's for most of the last 2 decades it's been a more valuable position, so you get more value out of it. But the way the game's played now, receiver has become just as valuable as the corner, and so he's a better receiver than he is corner. I think he's more natural as a receiver than he is as a cornerback, and so for that reason, I probably would start him at wide receiver and then play him at corner.
He has, and this might be, I might be getting a little lofty here. He has the best ball skills I've ever scouted. 10 years doing this. The way he attacks the football in the air, and now he's not going to obviously be your great contested catch wide receiver at his size, but he had 2 drops his entire collegiate career. Like he has Larry Fitzgerald level numbers in terms of holding on to footballs and just the way he's able to pluck the ball out of the air, contort his body. And again, at corner, that's obviously super valuable. That means that those 5 or 6 chances over the course of a season, maybe, 8 to 10, he'll secure. And that he's, if you get a go ball on the sidelines, that's a 50-50 ball. I'd probably think Travis Hunter's coming down with it more often than not than the wide receiver. So that's obviously a great proposition to have there. But on the flip side, it's like, we're targeting a guy 150 times. I think that's a little bit more valuable having the ball skills on that side of the football than on the defensive side of the ball. But
I've had a couple guys mention Justin Jefferson's name when talking about him as a wide receiver. I mean, doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah. So I'm right there with you that I think wide receiver is where I'd play him at the next level.